Thank you. So yeah, we all know, don't we, when we were asked to share on a topic, um, but there's so much benefit, isn't it, that actually I was been thinking about it for a couple of days, and there's so much benefit when you have something to think about. So where to start? I think it's an important topic. I've been through in my early days. I think it would be fair to say that I was so keen to make good efforts that I got kind of serious about it and quite heavy about it. And I looked up this meditation joke on the internet. Very short, only a couple of lines, but it kind of illustrates the point that I was thinking about. So it goes something like this. So there was a meditation student, and they were asking their teacher how long it will take them to gain enlightenment if they practice the meditation diligently and faithfully each day. And the teacher said, 10 years. And then the student said, well, how about if I really work hard and double my efforts and really, do it with a lot of force? And the teacher said, 20 years. So I I kind of like that because, in English, you probably have this similar thing, but we have more haste, less speed. And sometimes um, if we if we're rushing at something, it can actually slow us down. This is what I find. And someone said something to me some years back, which I've kind of adopted. When I said, "Come on, we've got to get on, we've got to get on with this," and they said, "David, don't rush. Just move quickly with focus." And I really like that. I mean, I saw that. I worked as a dentist for many years, and it was mostly with young children, and so you can imagine it was nice, but a bit challenging. 25, 30 moving targets each day, and in your mind, because the mind always wants to be ahead of what you're doing. In your mind, it's got to get going. But actually, I found that if I rushed, if I tried to get ahead of myself, then actually it would take longer, and more likely to make a mistake, which would take longer. So that's so. So I learned really to what we would call moving at the speed of the road. We've all had that experience, I'm sure, where in your part of the world, you want to get somewhere, but the reality is, okay, we have speed limits in the UK, which are on cameras, so we have to be careful. But the reality is, you can only go at the speed of the road. If the traffic is a bit thicker, you can't go any faster. And yet, we know the mind, isn't it? The mind wants to go faster and be there before you can be. So I think this idea of being moving at the speed of the road is very useful. And I found out recently that on one of these driving courses, the difference between traveling 100 miles at, say, I don't know, 70 or 80 miles an hour, or 80 miles an hour, and driving at about 70, it's like a couple of minutes difference. And so all that time you're making all that effort to get there somewhere quickly, and you're actually stressing yourself. And the reality is you don't actually get there much quicker. It's literally minutes. Now, in terms of a kind of spiritual effort, it is a little bit different, but I think the same kind of principles apply, because basically, back to basic gyan, back to basic knowledge. The form of the soul is light, and Baba is always telling us, isn't he? You should be double light. Whatever comes in your mind, or whatever we need to do, that we should be double light. So have that feeling of being unburdened and kind of carefree. And Baba's mentioned that, hasn't he, in the recent Morleys, instead of saying why, if you say why, you'll cry. And Baba said, don't say why, don't ask questions, but fly. And obviously when you so when we go on the planes for our flights, they're always checking how much we've got in our luggage, how much in our hand luggage, because there's a certain limit to what the plane can hold. And obviously, if the soul wants to fly, then we have to be removing our burdens and our baggage and to get off the ground. So I was kind of thinking, what is it that burdens me, or what is it that kind of slows me down, really? And there's a couple of things that are coming to mind. When I was thinking about being burdened, as I mentioned, it's something that slows me down. And also, when I'm burdened, I lose the enjoyment. And I really question myself if I'm not really experiencing that pleasure in Brahmin life, and I'm not feeling that happiness and that enthusiasm, and it all feels a little bit heavy or a bit burdensome. It doesn't feel good, and that's not what Baba wants, and it's not. I'm sure it's not what we all came to Baba for in the first place, because I'm sure, like myself, we wanted to get rid of all our burdens and the habit of taking on burdens and being light. And so for me, I really do check myself. Am I doing everything with lightness? Am I doing everything with easiness? And when I'm thinking of, I like to look at the dictionary definitions, which I always found them quite interesting. But when you look at things like lightness, it does say joy, joyous, happy, childlike, playful, free from care and free from anxieties, and also free from being too serious. I worked with, as I said, I work with children, so I couldn't really be serious, because I had to be very quite easygoing and light with them, because they're obviously nervous. And also Baba has often been described, Brahma Baba has often been described as entertaining. I think the word's Ramnik or Ramrik, which means like spiritually entertaining. So not necessarily telling lots of jokes, but he had I think he had a lightness about him, and in some cases, he was a bit mischievous, a bit childlike, and a bit naughty. I mean, we've all heard of the stories when in the early days, and Baba had put up, and the sisters, I think the sisters were next door in a room, and I don't know if it's true, but apparently Baba put a spider or something on one of the pillows, and then heard all the squeals. And then apparently next day spoke to them all about being a Shiv Shakti and how you shouldn't be scared of anything. And so, there's quite a lot of stories where Brahma Baba, has been described as being very light and easy and playful, I think. And you know, our dear Daddy Janky, I mean, I understood in the early days she was very serious, she was very studious, and you know, but towards the end, she had lightened up a lot. And you know, when she was in London in those 5 years before she went back to, you know, went back to India, she was always saying, "No, come on, lighten up, enjoy, don't be serious." And so she was actually telling us to do everything with lightness and easiness and enjoyment, and so I thought that was really interesting. And you know, again, going back to sort of Baba, um, um, Baba had that balance of being very mature, sort of like, I think it's Gambhirta in Hindi. So it had that maturity and also this entertaining nature, that lightness. I mean, you know, I'm sure we've all heard the stories. You know, when Baba was with children, he would, you know, be light and play card games with them and dices. And when, you know, when Baba's children came who were in older bodies, then Baba would say, "Well, I'm an old man like you." And so he had this lovely, it seems, the stories we hear about him, had that lovely way of relating to people. And I think that's really important. To be able to be light enough in our mind so that we can catch where someone's at, so we know how to relate to them. Because if someone is a little bit more serious than I'm joking around, it doesn't help them come close to me, and therefore they're not so easy to serve. And whether it's you know, people outside or even some Brahmins. So I think the ability to be kind of very flexible and light and easy in our sanskars, so that we can, just see where everyone's at, and then just in a very nice way know what's the right thing to do. So that's one thing I wanted to mention. And then I started to think, now we've got the Morley search engine. It's quite it's quite nice, isn't it? I did actually have a quick look. I didn't have much time, but I found when I plonked in lightness, there wasn't so many quotes. There was tons and tons, as you'd expect. Light came up in the Morley search, but there was something. There was a little bit about lightness, and Baba was connecting it to you know, to spirituality, and it was really connected with this idea of being a little bit overburdened, and I think, yeah, Baba. I'll just got the line here somewhere. One line from the Morley. Yeah, the reason for not being spirituality constantly is that you don't consider the self and those for whom you're instruments in service to be Bapdada's entrusted property. So Baba's, this is a very powerful line. Create the thoughts that you have in your mind while considering the mind to be given to you in trust. So there's this whole thing about being a trustee. And I can remember, gosh, it was a long time ago, when I was quite new in Ghana. In those days, you know, we would phone up London and speak to Sister Genti or Sister Sudesh, and sometimes Daddy Jackie would come on the phone. And I was in a very unlight stage. I think my state of mind was gone down, and I was a little bit heavy, and I blurted this out to Daddy, I'm feeling heavy, and my mind was got full of this and that and the other, and there was this kind of very slow voice. She said, "David, you don't have a mind." it's Baba's mind. And I thought, oh my goodness. And I must admit, it took me many years to actually understand what she was saying in a proper way. And in this morning, you can have a look yourself, but basically Baba was saying, don't misuse that which is entrusted to you. So, basically, be a student. And I think that's a really ongoing, this isn't an overnight thing. That Baba mentions a lot in the Morley, doesn't he? To be a trustee, but actually to think about being a trustee of your mind. I mean, what does that mean? Trustee of your mind, trustee of your words, being a trustee of your actions. And with possessions, it's a little bit easier, isn't it? And things. But being a trustee of your mind is quite a deep thing to think about. And in one of the other in that same Morley, Baba actually flagged up one of the main reasons why we get heavy, which is obviously opposite to lightness. And I'm just, yeah. And then Baba was saying, this phrase that we often use, in BK life is, my son's scars. These are and Baba's given so many Morleys, hasn't he, about that, and particularly these Morleys that Baba's been speaking about recently, these 1995, I think the 1995 Morleys, very powerful Morleys. I mean, Baba's talked a lot about that, saying this is, we give excuses because we say this is my habit over many years, or my son's scar, and all that. And Baba, when I read this, Baba gave a very powerful, and he said, this expression, mice and scars, and Baba said the words mice and scars should be erased. Where did mice and scars come from? And so Baba said, you have to surrender yourself to such an extent that even your nature changes. And that's quite an I don't know, it's quite an interesting thing. I remember, again, it's quite a long time ago, when I came back from Madhuban, I'd gone through my serious bit, and then I became quite light-hearted. And then I thought, maybe I better be a little bit more, intent on making efforts and a bit more serious and be light. And when I came back from Madhuban, I told everyone, I said, right, I've decided I'm not going to tell any more jokes and all this. And they said, oh, no, David, please, please don't. We like it like this. So that was quite interesting. And then when I read this, this idea of the mind, mind, intellects, and scars, we teach that, when we're telling people about the functions of the soul. And of course, the soul's in the middle, the being of light. But then some time back, I started to think, oh, that's interesting. Being a trustee of your mind, in the sense that there I am, I'm the soul in the middle, and then I can step into my mind to think, and then come back to the middle, to be soul conscious. I can step into my intellect to use it when I need to. And then also, I can step into the sanskars, or my personality, and use that as a tool for expression and for service, and then step back. And so, I mean, we're all very familiar with this idea that, I'm the soul and this is my body, and so my body is my instrument. But this idea of like my personality or my nature, my the kind of the sanskars that I have, is also like an instrument, almost like, I'm not sure quite how you describe, it's almost like a subtle sanskaral body that you can step into to serve. And of course, in soul consciousness, I know I'm not all that personality, I can step in it. I can step into that to serve, and you see well, the daddies were so good at that. They seemed very natural. They didn't seem to be making any effort for soul consciousness. I remember coming up the mountain once with Dr. Nirmala, and I thought, oh, I'll take the chance to ask her to, Didi, how do you practice soul consciousness? And she just goes, oh, it's easy. And that was it. That was her answer. She's very brief sometimes with the words. And I thought, okay, it's easy. But those of us who had the chance to see Daddy Prakashmani, and if you hadn't met her personally, there's lots of clippings, and in fact, some of you might watch the Avyakt Parivar that comes out of New York. I quite like that when I get a chance to watch it, so that they show little clips of the ancestor souls and the daddies, and that some of the very, very beautiful, I must admit, it brings back beautiful memories. But even that first little clipping before whoever's talking talks, you see all the daddies, and they're just very easy, very light, and smiling and joking with each other. And ultimately, I think that's what Baba wants us to be like, really, to be very so easy, very natural, confident in my own self, that I don't need to be like anyone else. I don't need to copy anyone else in the BK family. I mean, the reality is I can't anyway. If we look at original Gyan, original knowledge, it's called Nij Gyan, because I love relating things back to original Gyan. I find for me, it's very pleasurable. So if we look at Baba's Maulis, each one's a soul, each soul is individual, each soul has got its own sanskars, each soul has got its own part. That part is fixed, it can't be changed, and the part of one can't be like the other. So when you relate it back to that, then my job as a BK, after many years of work this out, isn't to be like anyone else. I can be inspired by others, but not to be impressed, because if I get impressed by others, then I'm going to get influenced. And basically, we really only want to be influenced by Baba, and maybe those who are following Baba very closely. And in fact, I heard them describing Raj Yoga to someone as putting yourself under the influence of God. I thought, oh, that's a nice way of describing it, putting ourselves under the influence of Baba's qualities and Baba's virtues. So I think as a family, we definitely inspire each other, don't we? Recently, we've been very fortunate in the UK. We had Sister Vedanti visiting, and Brother Bridgmo was here. Sister Pratibha was here before that, and I was just, had a chance to spend a little bit of time quite close up. Sister Vedanti came over up north and stayed over in Manchester and Leeds, and Bridgmo, and I was very surprised. Bless him, even as I travelled up and stayed overnight in Manchester. So we had it was delightful, really, just having that time with him very close up. But what I noticed is they're just so natural. In England, we have this expression, he's comfortable in his own skin. I don't know if how that translates, but it means, someone's kind of happy and content, or they're okay with their life, they're okay with how they function, and they can learn from others and be inspired by others, but they're not having to copy others. I mean, this is a slight aside, it's probably another topic, but I feel as the BK, it's quite dangerous to be impressed by other BKs, because then I'm opening myself up to influence, and then usually BKs that impress others, you hear people kind of talking about their name rather than Baba. And of course, with our seniors, we do, but with our seniors, it's very clear that they've become like that because of Baba, and have that humility. Anyway, that's a slightly different topic. But going back to this thing of being a trustee, and also its connection with responsibility, because it in the early days, when we had the opportunity to meet Baba, and some of those things are coming out in the recent Morleys, where Baba, particularly with the foreigners, would always say, "Don't think too much, don't overthink things." And Baba actually, I think my second meeting, when I met Baba way back in the 70s, Baba said, because I was very serious at that time, and Baba said, "Don't think too much. Let Baba do the thinking, and let Baba take the responsibility." So as you do, I spent many years thinking about what Baba meant about not thinking. And I even, some years later, I asked Daddy Janky once, I said, "Daddy, when Baba says don't think, does she mean don't think?" And Daddy said, "Oh, you Buddha." He said, "David, of course he doesn't mean, of course, when he's saying don't think, he doesn't mean don't think." He means only think what you need to think about at the time you need to think about it, and for as long as you need to think about it. And I thought, oh, okay. And I just want to focus down on this bit of this thing of like what, because I started to think, what makes us heavy, this whole thing of burdening. And, one of the things, I did a lot in my early days, and I've now moving away from overthinking. But, overthinking makes us heavy. And it's an interesting expression, if someone's worrying about something, or the overburdened, in English we say, "Oh, come on, lighten up." And overthinking or sort of ruminating thoughts really makes us heavy, and it brings us down from a kind of a light stage into a lower stage, and then it can cross over into depression if we're not careful. And even looking at that as because again, Baba's been talking a lot, hasn't he, about not just positive thoughts and pure thoughts, but elevated thoughts. So thoughts that elevate us. And of course, the opposite of that is thoughts that depress us. Literally depress us. They bring our level of thinking down, or they bring our energy levels down. And in my experience, that's when I'm overthinking too much. And if I'm being honest, for me, it's been a real quite a journey to move from overthinking and, I suppose, worrying thoughts in a sense, to a point where you only think about what you need to think about. And I can, again, just going back to our dear Daddy Janky, I remember she was talking about this, and he was actually with some scientists. It was in Baba Bhavan in London. It must have been a long time ago. And this was actually, he was actually a top scientist from Israel, if I seem to remember. And Daddy said, "Don't think, stop thinking." And of course, what Daddy meant was don't overthink and go into. And he said, "Daddy, I'm a scientist. I have to think about things. I have to think things through." And of course, Daddy wasn't meaning don't think about things in that way, but she was talking about not going into excessive thinking, because I don't know about you guys, but Baba's, the intellect doesn't work when I overthink. it's much more difficult to make decisions. This is my experience. And when the intellect becomes heavy, it's much more difficult to make decisions. And again, I remember some years ago when Daddy Janky, she kind of announced in class, I've got this great new way of being able to make decisions quicker. And we said, yes, Daddy. And she said, I don't think about it. So you can imagine all the things that are coming to the daddies and the seniors that they have to deal with and think about, and challenges and obstacles and people's behavior and everything. And so Daddy's solution for that at that time was not to think about it. That's an interesting way of lightening the mind, isn't it? Because certainly for me, we think, well, how can I make a decision if I don't think about things? Now, but what I've found is that if I think about things too much, then it disconnects me from Baba, and then I'm on autopilot, and it's much more difficult to catch what Baba wants me to do in that situation. Whereas if I think, okay, no, I'm going to hand that over to Baba, then and I don't worry about something, then I'd have this experience that a thought sort of drops into the mind, and usually it turns out to be okay. Like today, we do quite just about 10 minutes away from the centre. There's a beautiful ruins. I think it's a Cistercian abbey, Kirkstall Abbey, near the river, and we've been doing meditative walks around there for many years, and we take people around and we have conversations about various qualities as we go around. And the normal person who's doing that is away, gone to France with Sister Maureen to Tairaki and stuff, and so someone else was stepping in. And at the time when they should have really been down there, I just happened to, this thought came in my mind, oh, I hope they haven't forgotten. So I just mentioned to the person, I said, are you aware that it's Wednesday and you're going to be doing the meditative walk in 20 minutes? I went, oh my goodness. So he dashed off, and luckily he turned up because there was a whole group of teacher and brought some other teachers along. So now I don't know where that thought came from, because actually what's going on here at the center is we're having a lot of repair work, and this morning we had 4 guys in the bathroom pulling stuff out, and there were 3 guys plastering, and the stuff all over the place. And so I've been actually quite well, it hasn't been one of those sort of relaxing, reflective mornings like that. But at that time, when someone called me and said, is someone coming down? I just went quiet, and then the thought came in my mind. So I think it's really important for each of us to have this sort of sense of lightness, so that we can actually catch Baba's thoughts. And I mean, I'm just going to throw this out. It's not really something I want to open up on, but I think in terms of overthinking, I can't remember who it was, but some years back, I think it was a class, might have been a class in Malaban, but they were putting out the reflective question, what is it in any situation or anything, what is it that I'm responsible for? What is it that Baba's responsible for? And what is drama? What is the drama responsible for? And I think it's a very useful thing to think about, because if quite often I take responsibility for things that Baba's responsible for, or drama's responsible for, and Baba would say, well, actually, I'm responsible for outcomes, but you're responsible for, say, I don't know, if you're doing something, communicate clearly and speak clearly, but the outcome of what you're sharing, that's Baba's responsibility. So if I start worrying about, if I'm doing a talk, public talk or something about how people are taking it and this, that, and the other, then I'm crossing the boundary. I'm crossing the boundary from lightness into, I'm breaking the rules, really. So that's a bit of homework for us all. What am I responsible for? What is Baba responsible for? And what is the drama responsible for? Because if I cross that boundary, like I say, I'm going to create extra thoughts, and then I'm going to start getting heavy. And the other thing I started to think about, and again, I'll throw it out a little bit, so just to think about afterwards a little bit more, really. What does it mean to have lightness in my thoughts? What does it mean to have lightness in my words, my actions, and my interaction, my relationships? And I suppose, what does it mean to have lightness in relationship to situations and to the things around me? Because again, coming back to this idea of being a trustee, I had to do a little session last week on, I was connected to belonging. And, it's an interesting word, belonging. Baba says, you belong to me and I belong to you. And but if we use the word for belonging, if we use the word belonging in a body conscious way, we talk about our belongings, which in English, I'm not sure if this translates, but what they're called possessions. So, so this is my belongings. And if I get attached to things, which of course is the body conscious way of relating to things, and it could be things and it could be people, could be our center and situations, those things possess me, literally possess me, and they influence me, and they will make me worried and heavy. And so again, I've got to have the right relationship, I think, with those kind of things. And I have thought about this thing of belonging quite deeply. I mean, most of you know Sister Maureen and I are married, and we're still married after 40-odd years. Of course, Maureen spends all the time in London, so that's quite a good ingredient for a successful marriage. We don't see too much of each other. No. But I think, when we came to Baba, it did really shift our relationship. And we were pretty close before. We were very close before we came to Baba. Then when we come to Baba, it shifts over from a sort of a body conscious belonging, which is sticky and possessive and fear-based and clingy and creates sorrow, basically, Baba would say, wouldn't he? And then it becomes, okay, it just becomes a role to play. But you change our relationships and become self-conscious, and then the idea of someone being my wife or my child or my husband, it doesn't really compute, does it? Really, it's just a role. We've come together for some reason, some connection, and we're playing out a role, and hopefully whatever the role, we can learn from each other, can't we? So the people you're around in your center, and all the the people who come to the center, there's some connection, but that connection is through Baba, isn't it? I mean, I don't know about you, but sometimes I look around the class, or even nowadays more so looking around the Zoom, who's on Zoom, and I'm thinking, goodness, if we weren't all Babas, we wouldn't. I wouldn't be in the room with these people, because their backgrounds are so completely different. And so again, that gives a kind of a lightness of interactions, but the lightness comes when everything is through Baba. And I've thought about this quite a lot. Can I actually own anything? And the answer, of course, is no. And Bridgemoen did a very nice talk in Manchester. What was the theme? Overcoming problems or overcoming obstacles, a spiritual solution. And he went through quite a few points, but one of the first points he made is that if you think you own something rather than using it as a trustee, he said, that's a problem. He said, that's really going to be a problem. And it's the same with people. I mean, it's a very strange concept where we feel we can have a ownership over someone else. But the reality is we can't. And so the reality is in our relationships, after, when we come Baba, whether it's the people in the center or my Lokik family or whatever, we shift that from being a bondage, which becomes heavy, like a burden, into what can I learn from these souls? What can they teach me? And then I find that that brings lightness. That brings a lot of lightness. Because when we start looking about burden, Baba's very clear, isn't he? If I start looking at people's stuff, thank you. If I start looking at people's scars and their habits, and then I get heavy. Once I start looking at, oh gosh, why can't they put the knife back in the knife department? Why do they always put the knife back where the forks go? And why do they, why can't they get the papers out before they come into the Morley class? Have to pull all the papers and make all the noise. Once your mind goes on that, you start feeling heavy, and you start having not very positive thoughts about them, and our stage comes right down. Whereas sometimes I think if the kitchen's been left and there's a few things lying around, I say to Baba, oh, thank you, Baba. I'm so pleased that there's enough people using Baba's house that they can leave things out of place, that I'm not the only one here, and it's all nice and tidy. So it's like flicking things over, isn't it? It's good. So anything that burdens me is going to take away my lightness. And just coming back to this thing of possession, Baba's very clear, isn't he, that nothing is mine, and mine is one Baba. Oops. There's planes going by. Mine is one Baba and none other. So Mera to Shiv Baba ek dusra na koi. So, and literally, if we think of it again, going back to original Gyan, original knowledge, we really only have one relationship, and that's with Baba and our relationship with each other as brothers, and then brothers and sisters in male and female bodies. And that's pretty much it, really, isn't it? And if we keep that kind of relationship, then everything works lightly and harmoniously. So I'm looking at the time. Just one more thing that's coming in mind that I just wanted to mention. I was thinking about, okay, because this is about maintaining lightness in BK Life. So I was starting to reflect, and you can think about it more yourself as well. But in my timetable, my daily timetable, what helps with lightness, and also its connection to following sort of Mariadas and Srimad. Because I find, well, first thing is that, pretty much Baba's only Srimad is be soul conscious and remember me. I think that's pretty much it, really, isn't it? That's all we have to do. And then all the other things are things which are to support that, isn't it? Our lifestyle and everything. It is to help us be self-conscious of our food and our routine, and getting up at the right time, and having meditation and regular study. Those are without those things, we can't maintain that self-consciousness. But I think even within the following the lifestyle, I think there has to be lightness, because Baba, and I'm saying this because I was very serious when I came, and there was one time when I was meeting Baba when I was quite serious, and I want to make really deep efforts, and Baba said, just eat, drink, and be merry. And then Baba said, in Baba's remembrance. It means he was trying to lighten me up. So, because again, what I was mentioning earlier, if I get too heavy about things, it actually slows me down, and it's not comfortable. So, there's two things that Baba talks about, isn't it? Like the burden of sins, or the burden of our body conscious stuff that's in the soul. So obviously, yoga, and as we deepen our connection with Baba and our kind of burdens of the sin is going, then we will become lighter, and our heaviness will go. And the other thing I've found is that if I can be accurate in following Baba's lifestyle in a comfortable way for me, then that also promotes, I feel that promotes lightness. And, that varies. Everyone's different, and so sometimes they approach their life a bit differently. And maybe there's some BKs, like they have the airlines, British Airways Light. I think there are some BKs Light where they're doing their BK lifestyle a bit easy and light, and maybe that's okay for them. Right, so I'm looking at the time, so I think I should stop there. Yeah, short time. If anyone wants to make any comments or anything.
Yes.
And I hope I didn't speak too quickly.
You were
okay.
fine.
Okay.
You were very
and
good.
just to flag up, I told you guys, when I do, I don't do difficult questions. You can ask Yogesh and those, and Sister Maureen, and no, I'm only joking.
I don't know, is your guest here?
I don't know. He's probably,
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Anyway.
So if anyone has any comment, I don't know. But we've got 10 minutes, haven't we?
Please write in the
anything
chat.
you want to pick up, Maria?
Yes, please, if anyone has any questions, please place them on the chat. Yes, thank you so much. Everything was very clear, and yes, I picked up very good points. Whatever you said about overthinking actually is really very important, because when we think too much, we take it like it is our responsibility. We forget what Baba says, and then what you said, you disconnect from Baba, and you cannot catch his thoughts.
Yeah, and I think, okay.
What's the difference between thinking and churning? It's a question.
That's an interesting. Well, when we churn, we do have to think, but there's also, I think Sister Mahini mentioned this a couple of days ago. One is thinking with my mind in a more intellectual way, which with the intellect, and there's kind of thinking from the heart, which is like trying to feel what Baba's saying. So when we're churning, I mean, I think we are thinking. Definitely, when we're churning, we're definitely thinking. But we're thinking not for thinking's sake. We're thinking to clarify and to bring experience, aren't we? I mean, I find like reflective questions are very useful, because there's two types of questions. Baba says don't ask questions, but there are some questions which are like questions of doubt. They're very unhelpful. But there's questions of clarification, like, that was interesting. Why did Baba say that? Why has Baba mentioned this 4 or 5 times in the Morley, and Baba said it in the last Morley, why is Baba giving importance to that? So for me, that's a reflective question, which is stimulating, which takes me into churning. But yeah, I think churning, churning, in my experience, has to be done very slowly. And Daddy would always give that example. I don't know if they do it in some of your country, but in India, when they're churning the milk, they have a rod, and if you do, making the yogurt and the butter, and if Daddy would always say, if you do it too fast, then the butter doesn't come out, and if you do it too slow, the butter doesn't. It has to be kind of just right. And Daddy would often talk about that. So when I'm thinking or churning, I've got to slow the mind down so that there's an opportunity for something to drop in, some new insight. And also, it's not just thinking for thinking's sake, but I'm aiming to create experiences, because that's what we want. We don't want to be theoretical PKs, do we? So we know all about the knowledge. Like we can quote all the points about drama. Oh, it's drama. No, don't. But when something happens, I get surprised or shocked. And I'm repeating in my mind, oh, it's drama. But I'm not feeling that. So for me, that's ultimately what churning is. Yes, for clarification, but also to create experience. I don't know if that helps. I think, okay. I think, sort of a little bit what we were talking about before. Recently Baba's really been talking about humility and not feeling impacted by people, and not getting upset if they say things and blah, blah, blah. And I think, if someone is like that, what can I do? They're like that. They will change in their own way, at their own time. And I can have good wishes and pure feelings that, maybe this soul's nature of blocking me can change. But otherwise, I have to make sure that I'm free from the influence, because I think ultimately, like I was saying earlier, I don't think any of us want to be influenced by anyone, even other Brahmins especially, but we want to be inspired and take the things from Baba. And I don't know if I'm just thinking of the Star Trek. I don't know, going back quite a long time to my childhood. I don't know, but essentially the goodies have the spaceship, and when they're getting attacked, they put like a force field around the spaceship, so that when the missiles come in, they can't. And obviously, if their force field is stronger than the incoming missile or whatever it is, then you're protected. So I think ultimately it's more about what I can do rather than what expected the other person to change. And someone shared something useful recently, which I've adopted, and I found it really useful. If someone's behavior isn't 100%, or it's not very nice or whatever, instead of putting my mind into them, I think, oh, that's interesting. So what they're doing is they're showing me how I should not be. Do you know what I mean? So that instead of thinking, not starting to have negative thoughts about their behavior, I'm thinking, oh, that's interesting. So looking at that, how do I feel when they do that to me? I don't feel so good. So I'll make sure that I don't do that with others. So if someone speaks too quickly, or they get irritated, or they're a bit sharp with me, instead of thinking, oh gosh, how long have they been a Brahmin and they're still like that, I think, okay, that was interesting. They've become my teacher, and that felt very uncomfortable. So I'll make sure that I don't react and speak quickly to something else. So in that way, I'm kind of turning it back onto myself, which I think is kind of sort of a little bit of introversion, isn't it? It's sort of, I'm not going out, but I'm thinking, what can I learn from this? How can I change, and how I can use that? Because there's that example with Mama, I think, wasn't it? When was it Mama or Daddy Yankee? I think it was Daddy Yankee, when someone was like accused of doing something that they hadn't done, and they were given correction by Mama, and they said, "But Mama, I didn't actually do that." And Mama said, "It's okay, don't worry, that's fine, but keep the correction for a time when you might need it." So, which I thought was kind of interesting. So and for that, these points that we've been sharing on the AVX signals about humility, so important, because I think I need to cultivate a natural sense of humility. Otherwise, I'll find it very difficult to be light in relationships, particularly amongst BKs.
Yes, thank you. There is another question. Are the things we live through our mirror? Are the things we live through our mirror? The things that we see around us, and we live in those things, are they our mirror?
Yes, they can be. I think so. Yeah, definitely. I mean, sometimes if I'm reacting to someone, particularly, obviously, it's usually because I've got a little bit of that in me. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be reacting. Like, I can see a little bit of that in myself. It's like I've moved from sort of kind of being a bit over serious about things to becoming light, possibly too light, some people think, but that's okay. In fact, Baba actually said to me once, "Oh, it's good now. David used to be very serious, and now he's changed," which was very nice from Baba. But what I've noticed, because I had to move from that little bit of heaviness and seriousness to lightness, sort of from overthinking, a little bit of worry, to trying to be a lot easier about things. If someone around me says, "But David, what about this? What about," and I said, "It's okay. It'll all be fine." But I can see that something comes, I get a little bit irritated. I feel like saying, "Don't worry, it's okay, leave it." Because I used to be like that, and it does become a little bit of a mirror. But ultimately, I believe we're on the way. What did Baba say? We're on the way from Brahmins to trainee angels to beautiful deity flowers. And so there has to be some point at the conference age for all of us that we actually transition over, and our reactivity stops, and we get there. And in the meantime, yes, I think we are mirrors for each other. And in Madhavan, we've sometimes had that experience, haven't we? It's like the hall of mirrors, where all the people, all the BKs in front of us are reflecting things back. But the other side of that is the positive side. I was at Oxford, for the reopening a couple of weekends ago, and one of the things they put on for the public, meditation and grounding and earthing and movement meditation. And there was a lovely space where from the trees they'd actually hung mirrors, literally physical mirrors, and on the mirror it is written, "Who am I?" And so it was encouraging the public to sort of literally reflect on that. And so in a positive sense, we can see lovely qualities in others, and they can be reflected back to us. So it's nice to be a mirror, I think.
Wonderful.
Good. See my old friend Drusula. Hi, Drusula. Nice to see you. Yes.
So I think the time passes so fast.
It does. So, yeah. So
Yes.
just throwing out a few thoughts, really, and it's things to think about afterwards. And actually, just one final, I was just looking at one final thought. Being over responsible takes away a lightness, but there was a passage that I looked on the Morley search from 1971. My Baba was actually talking about the benefits of taking on a responsibility, that if you take on the benefits of taking on a responsibility and you become an example, Baba said, then actually the blessings that you receive from others because you took on that responsibility brings lightness. And so the responsibility can help you become light if it's done in